Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I'm here with another round of recent reads, this time focusing on science fiction and fantasy. I have a really good variety in this batch, and interestingly enough, all of these books either have an element of horror or at least something very dark. So I think that even if you are one of my subscribers that are normally here for my horror content, you'll definitely find something to check out from this video. All that being said, let's get into the books. First, I read a book called The Outside by Ada Hoffmann. This is the book that I received from the publishers, Angry Robot Books, and I did this as a buddy read with Jason, Scott, and Brandy, so I'm going to link their channels down below. If you're interested in finding other booktubers that read a lot of science fiction, you should definitely check all of them out. Now, this book is set in a future where humans have developed artificial intelligence that has become so advanced that they have essentially become gods that the humans worship. And these artificial intelligence take humans and augment their bodies in order to serve their will. The story specifically follows one woman who is a scientist and along with her mentor has developed a new reactor. Right at the beginning of the story, in the first chapter, they turn on this reactor and something goes horribly wrong and they basically blow up an entire space station. Now the gods are very upset with this young woman, and as punishment they send her on a mission to track down her mentor and find out what has happened to her because that woman has become a heretic. And this book is just as unique as that premise sounds, and the author just explores the idea of these gods in a very unique way. And so often I just found myself pausing when I was reading and going, wow, that's a really cool concept. And that was definitely something that added to my enjoyment of this book. This book, as you can tell from that synopsis, is science fiction, but it almost feels like I'm reading a fantasy story because you're talking about gods and angels. And I'll say that while I like science fiction in my fantasy stories, I don't love when my science fiction reads like fantasy. So just for my personal taste, that was a little bit of a drawback. But again, that kind of goes with the fact that this book is so different. One of my favorite aspects of this book was easily the main character, who is a representation of a high-functioning autistic woman as well as a lesbian. And I like the fact that this is actually an own voices story because the author, Ada Hoffmann, is both queer as well as autistic herself. I don't personally know very many people who are autistic, but I did feel like the representation from what I know seemed very realistic, and I do trust that Hoffmann, of course, did her own research and was able to pull from her experience as well as those around her that also have autism and really bring that into a fully fleshed out character. She felt very well-rounded, realistic, and I enjoyed seeing those aspects of how she reacted to crowds, how she reacted to being touched. And I really think that added a lot to the story. I would love to see more fiction like this have that neurodiverse representation because it's not something I see in a lot of other stories. And it definitely, again, made the story just more interesting for me. This is definitely a case where I felt that the premise of the story was a little bit better than the execution itself. I did find the narrative to be a little bit stilted. There isn't a lot of emotional attachment in this book, and I just never connected with any of the characters, and that did set me back a little bit. I was happy to see the diverse representation in there, but I just didn't really care what happened to the characters beyond that. This book does have elements of Lovecraftian horror in it, but I want to preface that by saying that this book is not scary. In fact, the Lovecraftian references are more the fact that this book has a cosmic feel to it. So if you are someone that enjoys weird in your science fiction, you'll probably like this one as well. So overall, I'm really glad that I read this book because it is so different and really stretched me as a science fiction reader. I can't say that I fully loved the experience of reading every page because I didn't have that personal connection, but still one that I would definitely recommend if you are someone who already reads science fiction. This is a very accessible book to get into. You wouldn't necessarily want this to be your very first science fiction book, but the concepts are not overly complex in the way that the author takes the time to really explain this world to the reader. So as long as you're paying attention, you'll know what's going on. And I do think that this one would definitely be a good one to pick up for anyone who has read some science fiction and just wants to read something with some really unique ideas, something a little bit different. And overall, yeah, I would recommend this one. Next, I read a book called The Blighted City by Scott Kaelen. This is one that I received from the author, and this is an epic fantasy that centers around a group of sellswords that accept a dangerous mission because the reward is so good, and so they agree to go and find this artifact that has been lost in this desolate, godless land inside a city that is called the Blighted City. And the beginning of the story I absolutely loved. It read like a dungeon crawler, so anyone who has a background in Dungeons and Dragons or RPGs like that will absolutely love this beginning. I really enjoyed the characters. There is really good banter between the three sellswords who felt like not only comrades but also friends, and there's a lot of good back and forth, good bickering, and it just felt very fun and authentic to me. And I just loved the atmosphere of this one because it is set in this desolate, decrepit area. You really get to see those descriptions, and this book is not horror, but it has that darkness to it that I love. I love dark fantasy. Unfortunately, while I adored this beginning to the book, the narrative takes a really sharp turn, and I'll say that the beginning that I've described in the synopsis really only takes place in the first 25% of the book, and then something changes and the story becomes something else. And not to say that the rest of the book is not good, but it's just very different. And I had the problem that I fell so much in love with that initial story, that initial setup, that I loved the beginning so much that I became frustrated when that was taken away from me. And the story becomes a little more emotional, a little bit slower. The pace of the book definitely slows down. It does eventually pick up, but it just never fully recovered for me, and I just found myself wanting to get back to that initial idea. And so I'm really torn trying to rate and review this one because I pretty much want to recommend that everyone at least try this book out because the beginning is so fantastic. And again, the rest of the book is not bad. It just is different, and I can't really explain why without getting into spoilers. But if you're looking for an epic fantasy that has amazing atmosphere, that's creepy and has a good group of characters, and at least the beginning feels like a dungeon crawler, then you might want to check this one out. As well, I read a graphic novel that is called Outer Darkness by Layman, and this is a great mix of science fiction horror, which you know I absolutely love when those two genres come together. And this is set in a future where humanity has colonized the galaxy, and they have discovered what they call the outer darkness, where possession and ghosts exist and all sorts of other creepy, horrifying things. And this story follows a group on a ship that are going about and doing their job. And I love the fact that this book brings in the idea that the ship has exorcists on them, because if people can get possessed, then you need someone to exorcise those demons. And I just loved the concept of this one. It blended together some really fun ideas. I feel like, again, this is one where the idea of the book was a little bit better than the execution itself, because I didn't really get attached to the characters, and I did find the plot a little bit confusing. It is pretty weird, which I do enjoy weird science fiction. I do want to reread it at some point, and that might change my opinions on it because I would probably pick up more of those details. But even though I didn't completely love it, I liked it enough that I definitely plan to continue on with the series whenever volume 2 gets published. So if you're someone that likes science fiction and horror and enjoys the occasional graphic novel, this is definitely one to check out for yourself. Finally, I read a short story collection, and that was called Red Hour by Pamela Jeffs. This is another book that I received from the author, and if that name sounds familiar, that's because I recently talked about her other short story collection, which is called Saloons and Stardust. But this is her initial debut collection, and because I love that other collection so much, I was very anxious to go back and read through this one. I am someone who loves to binge through an author's work. When I find someone that has a favorite potential, I just can't wait, and I just need to check out everything they've done. Now, this collection is another speculative fiction piece, so it is a mix of fantasy as well as science fiction, and I did enjoy that blend. I did not enjoy as many stories in this collection as I did in the other one, but there were some standouts. My personal favorite is one called The Fallen, which is about an artificial intelligence robot that does search and rescue and is looking for humans in this post-apocalyptic setting. And I love that one. I had initially read that one in a different collection called Fright into Flight, and that was what made me fall in love with her writing. There are other really cool concepts in this one. There's one about a phantom ghost hunter, which I loved, as well as another story told from a whale's perspective. So really different. Each story is so different than the other ones, which I do appreciate. I like a story that can mix it up. And I would recommend this one, but I'll say that I like the other collection more. So if you want to check out Pamela Jeffs, I personally recommend checking out her newest book first. If you fall in love with her like I did, then go back and read this one just so that you have read everything that she has published. So that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I would love to know of the books I mentioned, which one are you most interested in checking out? Again, I think I got a good mix here. There is kind of something for just about every kind of reader, including those that don't normally read science fiction and fantasy. I really enjoyed getting to share these books with you. So if you enjoyed this, please consider like, commenting, and subscribing. Otherwise, I will talk to you again soon in another video. Okay, bye-bye.